Okay, so where were we? I kind of went on a tangent because I started to talk about Kauri, and then I realized I actually need to put some time into that too because so as I mentioned, Kauri was the head hostess, or well, actually the mama of a Ginza club, and the club in Japanese is kurabu. And in the hierarchy, I guess, of entertainment fields, it's considered to be the highest level, the luxury end of nightlife entertainment. And actually, nightlife in Japanese, traditionally, it's referred to as mizu shobai. Mizu meaning water, shobai meaning business. So the business of water, which has kind of poetic roots in the I think people these days know more about a lot of popular culture now talks about the five elements, which is within the medicine, within the culture of society, the metal, fire, wood, earth, air, etc. So if a woman is described as having mizu, having the water quality, it kind of expresses that she's very good socially, and which also implies maybe being able to use her feminine sexual attraction powers as well as kind of a wisdom and ability to move through society. And so women who have a strong mesu component to their personality are quite valued in the courtesanship businesses. This is going back traditionally, of course, because the ability to be kind of rather diplomatic, um, amongst and working in between powerful people, or individuals, um, is actually the most valuable skill. So the Mizushobai, the water trade, is a long institute like it is anywhere else. So, and of course, traditionally everybody knows about the geisha. That's not something I have direct experience with, but it's kind of considered to be an untouchable part and geisha were known uh, enter, to entertain people, like politicians and top businessmen and these kinds of people who are paying a lot of money to spend time with a highly trained courtesan for entertainment purposes, and that's not actually prostitution. Once again, that's another world into its own, actually. But of course, as a break off from that, there are different formats where the idea is socialization in a safe environment through trusted relationships, and then the building of both personal relationships and business relationships at the same time. So I guess outside of the institution of geishas, then you have a club, which is a more modern version of that. And then you would have your what they call loungy or lounges. Then there would be things like kabakura, which I imagine comes from the word cabaret, so like a cabaret club, which is a different thing than it might sound. Though they did have cabaret forms as well. The kabakura is once again it's another kind of it's a situation where socializing with women is done in a very well, it's done through financial transaction, of course, but it's also done in a rather organized manner. That is not straight out debauchery. It's there's rules, there's regulations. Whether the girls come and sit next to you or not is different. There's some places like maybe a snacku or a snack, where there might be the mama-san of a snack. They might have a little karaoke machine, little screen up in one corner, and there might be a younger girl or two who are actually behind the counter and don't physically sit down next to the clients. Whereas in the more expensive establishments, there's a lot of interaction, where they would come and sit down next to the client, pour their drink for them, light the cigarette, and it's all part of the play. So yeah, so the club is. is the high end, and of course, Kaori's club is in Ginza, which is the high end and luxurious part of Tokyo. So yeah, so when I had the first meeting with this in Kabukicho with the Yakuza boss member, the boss, I really wasn't sure who to turn to get the accurate information. But I thought, yes, who else would be better? Who else has an insight to the goings on, to the to the behind the scenes going on in this city? So I called my buddy. Well, actually, went round to her apartment. She just recently bought a brand new house in cash from her proceedings as a as a mama son. Um, and yeah, so I went round to see her, and I said, "Look, I don't know what to make of this. Nick and I were, just wandering around. We met this guy. He invited us for the evening, and anyway, these are his name cards." And she was quite intrigued. She's like, "Oh, wow, this is really interesting." But she didn't recognize the name on the card, and says, "Just a moment, let me make some phone calls." And I don't actually know who she called, but she made a couple of calls, and I think it was the second one. Basically, she put down the phone and she just looked at me and said, "Oh, he's the real deal. This is true, you know? Yeah, this guy is like he's number one of Kabukicho of Shinjuku itself, and yeah, he's like he's a big boss, and he's like a I don't know what they call it, the executive director, because of the laws against the organized crime, the mafioso, or the the yakuzas had had to like change this system of organization to make it like a corporate, so they have presidents and they have board of directors, and so that they could probably function as a tax paying organization probably. So therefore, he had a title on his name card as like like executive director or member of the board or something like this. And yeah, so he was an executive on the board of the Inagawa Group, Inagawa Kai. So yeah, so she was actually quite impressed because I thought, wow, well, this is interesting. If I'm managing to impress her, I mean, this is the lady who invited me to the owner of a Formula Three team, and some of the top bosses and some of the biggest companies in Japan that I'd ever met in my life, actually. And here was she kind of going, wow. And so yes, she was able to confirm that this was real, and as as we were good buddies, and well, relatively good buddies. I mean, there was always a distance between us. She once again, in her kind of position, she's dealing with a lot of different people, and she wasn't overtly um, she wasn't overtly cunning character like I had experienced, like for example, in the Chinese environment. People always, there's several layers and barriers and of between people, whether it's business or personal, and you're continuously trying to work out at what level are they trying to scam me, kind of thing. Because inevitably in China, it's always, there's always an angle in the end. And those things are not so obvious in Japan, where they just are quite generally, friendly and open. But of course, she's in a business which deals with many layers, but the Japanese do have it in a different way. It's more subtle. So once again, as we were friends, just hanging out normally, I also had realized, well, this woman's obviously balancing different interests at different times, whether that was with shady characters or with legitimate characters. And I'm sure she had a lot of secrets, and she didn't really share them too much with me. Of course, she had some gossip, and so I did manage to get some inside kind of happening, or what's happening in the city that other people didn't know about. And one of my jobs at the time was, as I may have mentioned, I was a salesman. Uh, well, there was two different times where I was doing sales job, um, but one of them was a recruiting agency that we had a recruiting wing and we had a sales advertising sales wing attached to it. So it was uh, kind of knocking around, making appointments with corporations, presenting them with actually a database, which we were selling them access to databases, to a database which had candidates for jobs. So HR people, it was a cheap tool for them to access, a large pool of potential recruits for their jobs. Um, I mean, it's a long explanation, but basically, if normally in the corporate world, if you hire somebody through an agency, you've got to pay, you might be paying 10 or 15% of their annual salary just to have the privilege of hiring that person, and the agent takes their cut of the salary. So it can be really profitable, and it still is a very profitable way of doing business in the corporate world. And our solution was we did have professional recruiting wing, but we also provided this kind of cheap tool where the HR person could have direct access and contact client candidates. And so I was kind of used to turning up to all kinds of corporations, big and small, with a suit and tie and a laptop to present the product, and of course the name card. So, and then later on, I was doing magazine, Japanese business, an English magazine. It was a business orientated magazine, and I was doing advertising sales for them too. Um, so yeah, so once again, that having Cody as a friend actually made life a little bit more interesting as a salesman, because I could ask her some questions about, hey, how do I get into this company? Any leads as to perhaps who I should talk to, and though not as often as I was hoping for, because I didn't want to push the limits. A couple of times, a quick word from her got me an appointment, and I could turn up on Monday morning and say to the boss, "Yeah, I've got like a couple of appointments here and a couple of appointments there," and the rest of the team's going, "Oh, how did you get in there?" Other salesmen have been trying for years and they haven't got an appointment. We're like, "Oh, well, just made a phone call," So, you know, yeah, but that's how it works anyway. So yeah, so Kaori-san was the mama-san of this club in Ginza, and as I said, she and even invited me a couple of times just to go along and join. The first couple of times, I need to think back actually, because the first time she just said, "Hey, come along to the club," and I thought nothing of it. I sat down, they served me drinks, we had fun. There's pretty girls there, all wearing pretty dresses, and they're all making a fuss over the customers. I had a fun time. And afterwards, we went to eat ramen. The next time I think the customer we were with us took us to Tsukiji, the fish market at like 2 in the morning, and we had sushi there. Um, things like that. That was just joining part of the Tokyo night scene at that level. It was interesting, and yeah, and actually nobody, and she didn't charge me. So the first couple of times I didn't really click as to the kind of money that was necessary, and in that place I never really saw money change hands anyway. It was whether that was done by credit card. I didn't see anybody physically hand over, and you didn't come up with a machine or anything. So once again, everything's dealt with in its way. So, but the once again, I got to meet some very friendly characters. But once their story came out, and they were sort of, guys would flash around their car keys, and they're very proud they had a Ferrari keychain or a Porsche keychain, or this their second Ferrari, and the other one was sitting around gathering dust and stuff like that, and they'd be saying, "Yeah, if you want to take my car for a spin, here you go, take the keys," and I'd be like, "Oh well, really, thanks, that's really generous of you. Shall I tell them I don't have my driver's license?" And so, but anyway, we'd just have a laugh and go along with it. So she was able to confirm for me the identity of the boss. And then later on, I thought, well, she's introduced me to a couple of interesting characters. and obviously this is the main part of her job because I realized that the other girls too, they were really really, how to say, very quite forward about wanting to introduce people to you. They always like, hey, don't worry, I'll introduce you, because this is their main currency. You see, that gives them their social uh, loud, their social power. I guess was that they could put Mr. A and B together, and they were seen as useful. So it was a lot of it was quite nice because once again, when you're a salesman, and you're kind of if you're in a job where you're having to look for contacts all the time, this was like a paradise in some way because people were voluntarily saying, "Hey, I'll put you guys together. I'll put you guys together. Let's meet up." And while that does happen, if you're in a bar full of, you know, people from different companies on a Thursday night, at this level, you know that if you meet somebody in this very small and very intimate setting, it has a lot more weight to it than just casually bumping into somebody at a bar and having a chat. I mean, things business can happen because of that too. But here it was all backed up by people who they know and who they trust, etc. So yeah, the so I thought, well, I actually said to Curry one night, I said, well, how about I introduce you to this guy? And she's like, yeah, not a problem. I thought, oh, aren't you worried? And she's like, no. She said, yeah, because they're my specialty. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, cool. Well, she was actually quite enthusiastic about the potential of having or meeting such a guy himself. I thought, well, okay, I'll try and do cut some favors for her. And so one night we did. One night I don't even remember, what happened, where we were, but somehow I remember calling Kari and said, look, tonight we're going to go and meet. Uh, we're going to Kabukicho and we're going to meet the boss. Come along. And she's like, yeah, sure. I think she dropped everything she was doing. And, it was kind of 10, 11 o'clock at night and she came over. So that night we went to one of his favorite clubs and he did have to have an early night. Now, was this the night? I'm mixing up the moments actually, but there was one night where he was a little bit on edge and he did apologize in advance and said he did have to actually leave because there was a huge meeting. There was a big gathering of bosses from all over the place. They're coming to discuss some important matters. So he was being a good boy that night and was going to have an early night. Um, and yeah, but Cody was there with me, and that was actually really good. I think it seemed like, oh, he was quite impressed that she was a hostess from Ginza, given the reputation. Except, and of course, she said, "Hey, come, why don't you come to my club sometimes?" Which, of course, was her number one goal was to get a top boy as a regular customer would be good for her business. But he sort of stopped and says, he's like, you know. Kabukicho is my area. This is where I'm safe, And once again, the stories of in 5 minutes I'll have 100 guys here, in 10 minutes I'll have 1,000 guys here protecting me. There'll be 10 black cars outside with one phone call. So, and he's like, I don't venture outside my place because Ginza is run by, I think he said the Sumiyoshi Kai. So, he was like, bit of a shame. I don't go there. So that was a bit of a shame. I thought, oh, it'd be nice. I thought that he might enjoy going to something that he wasn't obviously familiar with, and what would work out well for him. But there was another guy at the table that I think I'd mentioned before, and he was the young and upcoming guy. He'd come up from Fukuoka. This is the guy who scared me. This is the guy who he just looked like a perfect cartoon cutout from a manga or anime, the classical, um, very good looking, perfectly dressed, and but colorful jacket, not too colorful, but and he had the look of a killer about him, Um, and once again, he was there for business. He wasn't so happy that I was there, but having Kaori there as the softener actually made the evening a lot more smoother as well. and she invited him too to come to the club, and he didn't seem to have the same issues that the boss did, because he ended up uh, visiting a club, and I think he became a regular. And and she told me later on that yeah, she still keeps in contact with this guy, and so I think she got yeah, got something out of it. So that's good. I'm glad. I was just happy to be able to help her out too. Um, and I haven't heard any stories. I haven't really spoken to her in years. I haven't been back to Japan since I left in 2008, 2009. And so yeah, a lot of water is under the bridge, but I haven't got any updates. And I guess I'm doing this now because there's part of me which is assuming that this is all in history. But I mean, if I go back tomorrow, some of these threads could be picked up. So, which is also why I'm not in a hurry to release all the details yet, because I don't know what's okay to say, what's not. I follow a guy on Instagram, and Jake Adelstein is very popular with his story. He actually went to the same university that I went in Tokyo. He was at Sophia University, though I was there on a Japanese what we call Mombusho scholarship, which was the Japanese Ministry of Education in those days. They changed the name every few years, but that was a Mombusho program. I think he'd gone on an exchange program from his university. Maybe he might be a year or two older than me, but so he'd studied Japanese language at Sophia University and gone on to work as a reporter. And was it Yomiuri or Sankei Shimbun? I'm not. He was working for one of the largest newspapers anyway as a reporter. So he has a really interesting story, and he's wrote novels of his time as an investigative reporter and his time with the mafia, and did the series Tokyo Vice, which is on probably on Paramount or one of those streaming channels. Really good, and but there's a lot of parallels with my own life too. As it was in the same kind of period that he was there originally. But he has a lot more or a lot deeper experience with this whole area of the Yakuza. He's definitely specialist. Mine pales in comparison. However, I can only report what happened in my case. So yeah, so while people like him have actually taken their stories quite publicly, written books and novels, and you know, yeah, once again, I don't really know what could be translated as getting me into trouble. I mean, I have no intention of causing any problems for anyone. Um, but yeah, so I'm just waiting to see. So for the moment, I'm just taking notes, recording things, and we'll see later on. So yeah, so Kaori-san, yeah, as I said, she took us to the Formula One track and took us to the MotoGP track, and I got to meet to say hi to Rossi, the champion that year, who was, just in the pit wiping down his motorcycle, and somebody said, "Oh, this is Rossi." I pretended like I knew who he was. Hello, how are you? Yeah, shook his hand. That's it. You know, I didn't even know till later on that he was one of the top champions in the world. Um, yeah. So anyway, that was Kaori-san. Yeah. Well, I still follow her on Facebook, and we do chat occasionally, just a few messages. But she's still doing well and still running a club in Ginza. So yeah.